episode of Common Ground, the policy roundtable where we bring together a panel with diverse views on issues of concern to Newton residents and try to hammer out some of our differences. For those of you who are new to the format, let me introduce the rules. First, I introduce a topic. Then we go around the table once, with each panelist expressing a viewpoint. I then select the two panelists who disagree the most strongly and ask them to speak directly to one another in hopes of finding some area of agreement. I then bring in the other panelists to round out the discussion, and at the end of the topic, I put in my 2 cents and give an assessment of how we did at finding common ground. As always on Common Ground, we have some interesting topics. I think some particularly timely topics today. And we have an absolutely fabulous all-star panel. So without further ado, let me introduce tonight's guests. To my left, Emily Norton. Emily, welcome back to the show. This is the first time you've ever been on the show as a former city councilor.
That's right.
You were on last show, but that was as a city councilor. So how does it feel to be a former city councilor?
It feels great. Maybe you'll have me back again.
Yeah, I think you should come back. Less pressure, right? You know, no one can vote you out of office now, right?
That's right. I've taken care of that.
Self-selected out of office. And of course, you're also the executive director, is it, of the Charles River Watershed Association?
Yes.
So your day job is keeping you busy, I imagine.
Yes, never a dull moment.
Okay, well, thanks for all your work in keeping the river clean or making it cleaner.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Marc Laredo, great to have you back. Marc has a new old title. So you used to be the former president of the Newton City Council. Marc, of course, is once again the current president of the Newton City Council. So twice in a row, 2 shows in a row, we've had the president of the city council on. It's just been 2 different people.
Different person.
But Marc, you're also an attorney. Your firm is Laredo and Smith.
That's right.
And what kind of law do you practice?
I practice primarily at business litigation, general business law. We're a firm in downtown Boston.
Well,
I'm one of the founders.
Coincidentally, your name is in the firm
That's
name.
right.
Well, thanks again, Marc, for coming back on the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your recent election.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Martina Jackson, great to see you, Martina.
Good to see you, Ken.
Martina has so many roles and titles within the community. It's hard to know where to start, but I know that you've been a volunteer in prisons. You've done journalistic work many years ago, and again quite recently.
Right.
And I think, do we need a disclaimer that you're here speaking on behalf of yourself,
Just
not
myself,
on
right.
any organization that does news or anything?
Exactly. Thank you.
And also, of course, chair of the Newton Democratic City Committee for a number of years.
True.
Member of the Democratic State Committee, Public Policy Committee chair.
That's right.
Anything I'm leaving out that we should share with our viewers?
Well, so I've just been appointed chair of the Communications Committee of the Democratic State Committee. So
you're going to
be
get them back
more,
on message, right?
Right, back on message.
It's about time. It's been, 35 years, so it's time to get back on message. Thank you for doing that. Well, welcome back to the
Thank you so much for having me.
And Julia Malakie, great to have you back. Julia, I don't know if this is news still, but you're somewhat recently retired from the Lowell Sun.
Less than a year ago.
Less than a year,
Yeah.
okay. Still newsworthy.
But still doing a lot of photography around Newton.
Okay, excellent. And of course, you were recently reelected as Ward 3 Ward Councilor.
Yes.
And what committees are you on these days?
Well, I'm on finance, which I've also been on the last 2 terms, and I'm switching from public safety and transportation to programs and services
Oh, you're
this
on
time.
the best committee. Good choice.
I know you like it.
I have something
And
to do with
Marc, good thinking to put Julia on that one, because that one will deal with maybe something relating to trees at some point. Who knows?
And Julia's vice chair of finance now, too. So,
Yeah.
Oh, well. Excellent news. All right, well, we have 3, I think, pretty interesting topics, first show of the year. So without further ado, let's dive into topic number 1, which is turf fields. Are they the real thing for Newton? And so...
No one else is probably laughing, but we think it's funny. So that's fine for us.
We don't need a laugh track here. Right? So the question, of course, for the panel, recently Newton passed another round of funding for synthetic turf fields. There was a round passed more than a decade ago now, because I was on the city council then, and it wasn't even called the city council then. So I know it was a while ago. That would have been in the late aughts, I guess, 2007, 2008, we passed funding for those fields. And now there's been more funding approved. And my question for the panel in a minute is going to be, is this good for Newton? And if not, what's the alternative? Before we get into it, I know, Mark, you're familiar with what exactly passed. How many fields are we talking about here?
Yeah, so let's be clear on what passed and what was at issue. The Newton North High School field and track needed replacement. It's about 15 years old now, well beyond its useful life. Our athletic director made it quite clear that we needed to replace it. It was a matter of safety for the kids. And when we built the now older, but the new Newton North High School 15 years ago now, we put in artificial.
The now new or the new?
The new. Because remember, there was the old original building where I went to school, which was known as the new building, and of course now the current new building that we have in place. We put in artificial turf, and remember the track is a type of artificial surface
it's
as
chrome
well.
Rubber.
It is, and back in the day, 50 years ago, kids ran on cinder. And that's how tracks were built, and that's obviously not the way you want to build a track now. But the real issue was the field itself, because we installed artificial turf.
And is this the football field, the
This is
soccer
the football
field, the baseball
field, not the baseball field. It's the football field, the soccer field, the girls' field hockey, the boys and girls lacrosse. So you have sports there all year round, and it's also used for track and field events as well.
So, Mark, just to be clear, they're talking about replacing the existing turf, not expanding to have more turf fields.
This was replacing the existing turf,
Yes.
and that's very important distinction.
And do you remember how much funding we're talking about for this? Or was
I don't remember offhand. My colleagues. Okay.
$2.4 million.
And there was strong support from the folks in the Newton North community. They felt very strongly this field is exceptionally heavily used all year round, and
So
artificial turf.
this was funding just for the Newton North complex?
Just the Newton North complex, that's correct.
And so Mark, in a nutshell, is this a good thing or a bad thing for the city?
I thought this was a great thing for the city. And every decision that we make involves trade-offs. In this case, our athletic fields, especially at the high school level, are very heavily used. And grass fields for the type of use that goes on in Newton North and Newton South High School is not adequate for the array of sports that are played there year-round. And if you get heavy rain, for example, or other weather conditions, a field can be rendered unusable for a considerable length of time. I know from my own child who played varsity sports there just last year, how often that field is used and the difference you have between artificial turf and non-artificial turf. I'll add that the other schools in the athletic conference that Newton North plays in, they have artificial turf fields, and there's a reason for that. And it really is essential to running the types of sport programs, the athletic programs that we want to have in Newton. So for me, it was an easy decision, but I certainly respect my colleagues, two of whom are sitting here right now, who have very different views, and that's fine.
We will hear from them. We've got 2 current members of the city council, and 1 former, all of whom will have some perspective. But before we get to them, let's hear Martina weigh in on this.
So I was quite opposed to replacing the artificial turf with artificial turf. And my concern is the forever chemicals that live in artificial turf. My daughter lives in the UK, and much of the EU is banning artificial turf because there are problems. Fall and get a cut, and that goes into the bloodstream. This material is forever, and it is a danger and a hazard. And in addition, it gets into what is a high water table, goes into the water and remains there. Out it goes through the ecosystem. It is a problem because of its some nature that it doesn't degrade, it doesn't disintegrate. It's there forever, and it's a problem forever.
Thank you, Martina. Julia, your thoughts on this?
Okay, there's so many, I guess, dimensions to this.
When we
let's
start
talk
out
about
with for it or against it.
against it. And let's not forget, Newton South, 2 fields were replaced a year earlier. And I went over and watched the removal process and the new field going in process, and saw the mess that's created in terms of the spilled fill, old crumb rubber fill from the old field, new TPE fill spilled in the vicinity of the fields and still not cleaned up. But it's really a broader environmental problem. Every stage of artificial turf is bad for the environment. It's a petroleum project. The chemical manufacturer, where it's done in all these southern states, with whether it's Cancer Valley in Louisiana, or all this stuff is being manufactured in places far away from us, and they're kind of bearing the environmental costs of the pollution in that area. When it's used, it wears out, and what's wearing out, all those blades of the carpet are turning into, whether it's microplastics, nanoplastics, that gets leached into our water as well. And then the disposal is a big problem, because recent Philadelphia Inquirer article, which mentioned Newton, Pennsylvania is kind of a dumping ground for probably thousands of rolls of artificial turf. They were getting stashed in farmers' fields. They're in warehouses. There's no proven way of fully recycling it. The mayor is telling us that she's passing on the information we're getting from our contractor and the company, APW Enterprises, that is the supposed recycler. They are actually separating. They get the sand and the crumb rubber out, but they have not told the Philadelphia Inquirer reporter or us who is actually taking the used carpet once the fill is emptied, and supposedly it's being processed into plastic logs, plastic lumber, but no evidence of that. I actually just went to the plant in Pottstown yesterday and saw.
You went to the plant where?
In Pottstown, Pennsylvania.
You were in Pennsylvania yesterday.
I was in the area, so I went to see.
You weren't just there going there specially to see
No.
Newton fields from Newton South. They got moved there,
I was 2 hours away in New Jersey, and I thought, this is as close as I'm going to get for a while, so I want to see if I can find out. I walked in 2:30 in the afternoon. There was I looked at it on Google Maps, roughly 3-foot field long warehouse. One end to the
football field
long warehouse.
So 300 yards
about
long?
800, 900 foot building. Rolls and rolls of artificial turf in both directions as far as you could see. I wandered around for about 15 minutes. Nobody was there at first. I took all kinds of pictures. And then a man appeared and said—
With a rifle?
No, he said, "You're trespassing. Who let you in here?" And I said, "It was wide open." And long story short, they called the police on me. They made me delete all the photos from my phone, but they cannot delete the memory of hundreds, perhaps thousands of rolls of turf sitting there waiting to be recycled.
They made you delete the photos from your phone?
Yes.
Wow.
Aren't they still on your iCloud?
I unfortunately don't do that.
Oh.
I haven't figured that out. But I saw there were a few. You couldn't tell where one school's field ended and another began, but there were scattered ones that had labels. I saw Dedham High School's old field, and I Googled it. They took theirs out this summer, but the machinery was not operating. Now, when the Philadelphia Inquirer reporter was there, she heard the machinery running, stripping out the fill, but that was a planned visit. I just showed up, and nothing was going on, and supposedly. There's a market for the fill and the sand. I don't know who wants other people's old fill, but maybe there is a market for it. But still no answer on the turf.
We don't usually get this level of intrigue on the show.
Yes.
Like covert activity out
is
of state,
commitment.
cross state lines.
But also, there was a company, wasn't there?
I'm going to let Emily
Yeah.
weigh in, and then we can
More
get back.
intrigue.
I'm sure there'll be the suspense.
So I think, basically, I think before we entrust our Northfield and telling people that it's being recycled, I think we ought to get some real evidence of what's happening
All
through
right,
that.
and we will get to that part of the conversation after we hear from Emily and.
Yeah, so I agree with Martina and Julia and tried to make the case at the City Council. There's 3 key areas that turf are problems related. So the PFAS, PFAS, people have probably seen in the news, forever chemicals. It's in anything where you want to repel water. So it's causing a lot of problems for the health of firefighters because it's been in flame retardants, it's in tooth floss, it's in clothing, and as Martina says, it's called the forever chemical because it never dissipates. It causes cancer and respiratory disease and all kinds of problems. It was invented by 3M and DuPont, and literally in the 1960s, their staff were having babies with birth defects and didn't know why. So this stuff really is dangerous. There really is no safe level. The federal level is in the parts per trillion, and it's in all of our waterways. It's in every river in Massachusetts. It's in multiple communities' drinking water, and it's causing problems. And we don't know, you can't point to, oh, this cancer is from that. It's not like that. I absolutely agree with Marc that we value our kids getting playing time. I'm the mother of 3 boys that played and still play on these fields. I used to run a soccer program where we were trying to get, we would rent the fields. And so I very much understand why people support investing more in the turf and that it provides more field space. But this stuff is toxic. And I think of Al Gore's movie and that he titled it Inconvenient Truth. And this is why. It is very inconvenient that this stuff is toxic because it's so useful for us, but it's still the truth that it's dangerous. So it leaches into the waterways, can have all kinds of effects on our health, but that's not all. Even more, it also becomes much hotter than regular natural grass, and particularly when we're having climate change causing our summers to be in the 90s and 100, it can spike to 140, 150 degrees. So that's when you start to literally have health risks or beyond when people are out on these fields. And then the last is it increases the risk of injury. So the NFL Players Union argued against, they tried to ban the use for themselves. Women's US soccer. Because the men's soccer doesn't have to play on turf.
Right.
The women's soccer didn't want to. So this is something that the real athletes don't want. They know that it's not as safe for them. And so I don't think we should be putting this on our children as well. And I absolutely understand that other schools are doing that, but that doesn't mean we should be doing it.
So we've got health, safety, and environment are your 3 concerns?
Yeah, really.
I mean, I felt like we're
3
doing
for-
like the Amazing Ginsu 2 commercial. Like you've got, and if you're still not satisfied, we'll throw in injuries.
Well, I like that Julia brought up the environmental justice piece, where it's this, and all of our plastics being manufactured, much of it is in brown and black communities.
Where it's made and where it's disposed
Okay.
of.
Yeah, Louisiana and Texas. So there's a
I
whole
feel
mess
like
of reasons.
Marc is badly outnumbered
I know,
here.
we're
So I'm
piling
gonna.
up
Never
on it.
bothers me in the least.
Okay. So first of all, Marc, I want to give you the opportunity to answer why you support. You heard all these arguments.
I did. And look, you got to put things in perspective, okay? It's not like we haven't had artificial turf in Newton before. We've been using it for decade and a half right now. Our coaches know exactly what the temperatures in the field are. Our high school sports, almost all are played in the summer, the fall, or the winter. We do not have much athletic activity in
You mean the
middle
spring,
of
the fall, and the winter?
Spring, fall, and winter. Sorry about that. If we thought we were getting injuries, if we thought we were getting chemical exposures that were harmful to our kids, I mean, our kids have been using this for a decade and a half, and you got to look at what's the alternative. We're not the NFL. We do not have the ability to maintain perfectly immaculate fields like you might get at Fenway Park. We have fields that are used heavily, and you make trade-offs, and I think this is an appropriate trade-off to make, and I'm not dismissing health concerns. I think you always should be concerned about health concerns, but I also think there's some perspective here. And this is not brand new. We have been using artificial turf for decades. Decades.
So I'm going to let Julia respond. I'm going to try to consolidate this argument because I actually watched the city council meeting and heard the arguments on both sides. And so there's an argument that I think Marc is making that is, we have cars, we have petroleum, cars have tires, there's all kinds of pollutants, and so it's a matter of balancing the good and the evil associated with anything. Why is it that we want to ban turf fields but not ban automobiles, which do much more harm to the environment?
Well, actually, I'm feeling very bad about my tires lately. But the fact that every time we get rid of our tires, they're going off somewhere and
So
getting
that's-
turned into something bad. But
So should we all stop driving? I mean, in other words, that's the argument, is that there's a balance point, or is that not a good argument?
Well, I think
Martina doesn't think it's a good argument.
I think in a way I called it an arms race in my comments. It's like every community now. The artificial turf industry has done such a good job of selling artificial turf starting, 15, 20 years ago, that now what we hear from the Parks and Rec, the school people, is that every other school has artificial turf, so we need artificial turf. And every other school is probably looking at their people and saying every other school has artificial turf. That's why I really think and I hope there will be some action at the state level. There are bills in the state legislature that are looking at banning municipal spending on artificial turf, and I think that's the kind of thing we may need to have everyone, in a sense, de-escalate and go back to the way we were before we had it. Because I think rather than being driven by, we can never cancel games, we can never cancel practices. I think it would be healthier to look at new ways of doing things, because the track we're on now, it seems like the administration, and we haven't mentioned that the mayor decided to allocate, I believe it's $2.2 million of ARPA money to create.
I don't know that our audience knows what ARPA is. You want to explain?
American Rescue Plan Act. Basically, it's the COVID relief money that a city like Newton, the mayor has complete discretion over. The city council never gets to debate any spending with ARPA. So she's using that to create a new artificial turf field
Where
at
is that gonna be?
Albemarle Field. That's the multi-purpose field at Craft Street.
So
Now,
the city council has no
we will have
authority over
and
whether that.
during the debate on Newton South, some councilors besides the 5 of us who actually voted against it said.
Newton North.
Newton South. When Newton South was
Oh,
debated
the year before.
a year ago, some councilors, I remember Vicki Danberg specifically, who voted for Newton South, said they might feel differently about creating a new turf field in Newton. But they're never going to get the chance to debate or vote on that because
So, Marc,
Albemarle's going to be APRA money.
four of us around this table grew up in Newton, went to the Newton Public Schools, played on fields that were all grass at the time. What's wrong with, as Julia says, going back to that?
Well,
and
it's a very different time than when I was in high school. We now have women's sports that we did not have back then, or at least far reduced. We now have many more lacrosse, field hockey, women's track teams, things which may not have been there 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. So we have a much heavier use of our fields. We are encouraging our kids to play more sports. That is good. That is healthy. It's important. So to say, well, we got to do some alternatives, to me, you can't just say we need to have alternatives. You have to say what those alternatives are. And frankly, in this discussion, I did not hear that.
well, let me ask about two specific things I've heard proposed as alternatives. One is, obviously there are multiple issues that have been articulated with artificial turf fields, injuries and whatnot, but one of them is the PFAS chemicals. I've been researching a lot about them myself recently because I discovered that the nonstick pots that I had had these chemicals.
You didn't know that?
Yeah, well, so I went out and bought PFAS-free cookware, like throughout I do a lot of cooking, and so I'm thinking, wow, it's like every time I'm sauteing, I'm putting toxic stuff into my food, even much more directly than walking on top of toxic stuff, presumably, or running or playing a sport on it. And so I looked up to see whether there was such thing as PFAS-free artificial turf, and at least here's a company Water Savers Turf that's advertising PFAS-free artificial turf. Why can't we use that in Newton?
You know, I don't know the details of that, and if we can use PFAS-free turf and it functions roughly the same way, I think that's great. Why wouldn't we do that?
Well,
But that's not,
Okay.
I don't know, Ken, whether the turf that's being proposed in that particular product, I don't know how they compare, and I don't think we could do that on a show like this. I think you'd really need to step
no
in.
one looked
look
into
at-
this, though.
I have no idea if anyone looked into it or not.
Well, I'm
Ken.
gonna ask the rest of the panel.
There are a
if
lot of
anyone-
claims. There are a lot of claims from companies. And then when
That's
you
right.
dig a little deeper, they haven't actually tested,
Or they may-
call it
No intentionally added PFAS.
That's right.
intentionally
That's
added.
right.
Or it's not in the piece that they're talking about, but it's in another part of it. So from the research that we had and the speakers that we had, there is no PFAS-free artificial turf.
It can be part of the equipment that keeps the extruded blades from sticking to the equipment as they're manufactured. So that's not intentionally added, but it was
But,
how it was getting in there.
You know, I think look, in my view, you want to be very careful of any product you use. You obviously want to create your products as safely as possible, but things in life have a balance. And there are clear benefits to having artificial turf on our high school fields. And I haven't heard, again, I have not heard what the alternative is other than, well, you don't get to play as much. And that's not an acceptable alternative to me.
I did want to say, though, when you all were talking about it, Belmont voted not to put artificial turf on their new high school fields. Boston has several areas where they're also not doing it. It's not just isolated Newton. There are other communities that have come to the conclusion that it isn't safe. And when you talk about 15 years, it's sort of like tobacco. People didn't realize what the impact is over time.
I have to say tobacco is not a good example because the tobacco industry knew decades and decades and decades ago about the addictive nature of its product, and that was well documented for a long time. The issue was how it was marketed. So,
And there was no beneficial
and there's
effect
no
of cigarettes.
there's no
whereas there was a
beneficial
benefit.
aspect.
I
to
don't
it.
agree with that at all. If you're a smoker, you consider it beneficial. It calms you down, you lose weight,
Yeah,
etc. I
exactly.
just gave you the example of 3M and DuPont knew decades ago how
That's
dangerous
right.
their chemicals are, and they've been sending them out into our environment ever since. There's news articles I've seen recently that they may be on the hook for billions of dollars to clean up drinking water systems all over the country. So I do think it's a great example. And this right here is thyroid cancer. I don't know that I got it from a turf field. I don't know that I didn't. Probably not, because there wasn't turf fields when I was a kid. But I think it does make me more sensitive to why would we knowingly add more toxic chemicals to not just our environment, our children's environment. And we have not even had, I don't want to say a serious conversation, we've had no conversation about what the alternatives could be. Crescent Street, there's a field there. Why aren't we turning that into an athletic field? We have colleges and universities in our area that don't pay us property taxes and are supposed to pay us
They use
services.
artificial turf.
Not all of their fields.
Most of them do.
Not
Okay,
all of them.
well,
But this is the kind we have not had a serious conversation. We also let folks outside Newton rent our fields. Maybe that's something we should be looking at. Let's actually take
That has nothing to do with the high
let's-
school sports program.
Let's take this challenge seriously. If we really weren't going to be, what would all the options be? We've never really looked seriously at it.
Well, if the question is that we need more fields to have adequate play, one thing that I've wondered about, and maybe someone around the table knows the answer to this, is there's a property across the street from Newton South High School. Newton South High School has had problems with it, not having adequate numbers of fields. That property has been on the market, reached out to the city. Why has there been no conversation about at least taking part of that property and putting athletic fields on it? Does anyone know if that
Are you talking about the Dudley
considered?
Road property?
On Brandeis, right across from the front of the school. Yeah, it's Dudley. It's between Dudley
Okay.
Road. and
Most of
Brandeis.
that is hill and ledge and also.
Well, there's hill, but it can be regraded, of course.
I think before we propose that, somebody has to actually look to see if that's.
Well, has someone looked into it? I mean, because
That's a very hilly area, filled with ledge. I don't think it'd be environmentally sound to just go and level that area.
Oh, now you care about the environment.
Of course I do.
well, I would.
To your point, no, we haven't. We have not been creative to look for solutions. And we need to find more field space anyway. We've just approved hundreds, if not several thousand more units. More are coming. some of these are going to have children in them,
And
I
that's
bet
a
some of those
point
kids.
I kept making during
Well,
both
if we're going to
debates.
increase the
need to-
population of Newton by a third, we might
I
increase.
think
Yeah.
we can all agree that we have a problem with not enough athletic fields in the city, period.
But
And we can,
yeah.
there's definitely an issue there. And with the proposed increase in our population is even a greater issue.
All right. Well, it sounds like we're finishing on a little bit of common ground. I will say that I didn't expect there to be complete common ground after a vote had already taken place on this. But I think there is a shared concern for the health and safety of the kids in the community, and a shared concern for making sure there's enough athletic fields. And hopefully, in this new year, people will put some additional effort into identifying potential acquisitions for making not just active recreation like athletic fields, but more passive recreation areas in the city. Just to put my 2 cents in really quickly, I coach, or the last couple summers, I've coached a citywide high school baseball team. Our home field has been Newton North High School's baseball field, and we've also played at Newton South baseball field. And it is true that when it rains, volunteers, namely me, I would spend hours during the day shoveling water off the field to try to make it playable, quick dry, and it is absolutely the case that sometimes Parks and Rec has had to say with natural grass fields that they're just unplayable after rain, and right next to us there's lacrosse or soccer or whatever else going on. That having been said, I think that things aren't all black and white. I voted for the turf fields 15 years ago. I'm not sure if I'd cast that same vote today, but I would certainly make sure that they were doing everything they could to maybe there isn't a totally PFAS-free field, but I would certainly make sure we were buying the lowest level PFAS field that is available anywhere on the market. I don't know whether that research has been done, but I certainly hope that before anything's installed, we make sure we're getting the safest product possible for our kids. Let's go to the second topic. Second topic, oh yes, affordable housing. So, on the good news front, I think everyone will agree this is good news. Newton has, after a number of years of sort of stalling out at around 7 or 8% affordable housing in the city, has in recent years achieved the state statutory goal of 10% affordable housing, which exempts us from what I think are colloquially termed hostile 40Bs. In other words, when you're below 10%, local zoning, or much of local zoning, can be ignored by a developer if they include 25% affordable units, if you're not at this 10% threshold or another land area-based threshold, not to make things too complicated. But once you achieve that threshold, you get what's called safe harbor protection, which means that you can still have 40B affordable housing projects, but they cannot ignore local zoning without local acquiescence by the Zoning Board of Appeals. So in other words, you don't have what are called hostile 40Bs, only friendly 40Bs. And that sounds so much nicer with those friendly Bs buzzing around our community, 40 or however many of them. My question to the panel is, we've made some progress on affordable housing. Are we at the promised land? Or do we need to do more to create affordable housing in Newton? Let me pick on Emily first.
Sure. No, I think we should never say that we're done. There's probably always more that we can do. It's complicated in that, as we all know, Newton is now it probably has always been, for those, especially those of us who grew up here, think that, always been a very desirable community. Even more desirable now, arguably, so close to Boston, wonderful old architecture, great schools, and so it's always going to be high in demand. And so we have the challenge that any wealthy community in America has, which is, well, how do you also continue to make space for people who are middle income, low income, et cetera? So it's great that we've gotten this far, but I think we always need to be looking for opportunities, particularly for truly affordable, more like the project,
The Armory project.
the Armory project in West Newton. I do think we should be looking at our parking lots and more models like Austin Street. Unlike Austin Street, however, I would recommend that we partner with nonprofits, so all of the units would be affordable. I think we really still have to keep our eye on the ball of that, because otherwise, left to their own devices, developers build market rate, and those are expensive. And yes, a small percentage have to be set aside to be affordable. but it's a lottery. So anyway, I do think we should be doing that. And also, one thing that I did push for when I was on the city council was that more of the market rate units be smaller. Just by virtue of being smaller, they're going to be cheaper. And we have a large proportion of our population that live alone or just a couple. Not everyone needs a big house or a big apartment. And if you have, say, an older couple that doesn't want to deal with a yard, they want an elevator, they move into a smaller unit, that frees up a house, say, for a family. So that is where I think we should be going as we continue to try to create more affordable housing in Newton.
Thanks, Emily. Mark, to paraphrase what my kids say in the long car ride, are we there yet?
No. And the short, this is a very complicated issue. First of all, the 10% is misleading in that we do not have 10% of the housing in this city as quote unquote affordable. What we have is a formula that if we build a certain amount of affordable housing in a unit, we get to count all of those units as affordable.
For
So
apartments.
For apartments.
Which is what most of them
So
are.
that's
Rental
that's number one. Number two, I think it's critical to understand that we are highly unlikely to build any more single-family housing in the city of Newton for a very simple reason. We do not have the land in which to do it. So most of what we are building that's new is multifamily housing. Furthermore, most of what we're building is rental housing, not housing for ownership. And that is also a very, I don't want to say troubling because you need rental housing, it's important, but you're seeing a real shift in how the structure of home ownership. And you're seeing it not only here, but elsewhere in the country with the rise of developers who are building even single-family unit housing as rental housing. So you have a sea shift in what is going on in terms of your housing market. We also have a finite amount of dollars, and so the question always is, with our state and federal and local dollars, who are we building it for? Are we really building it for the most needy people, the ones who have the hardest time affording things, or are we building it for those, who may fall in the middle? And that's a very difficult policy question for us. I don't have an easy answer for it. On one hand, those most in need, I think that's always been a government job to help those most in need. At the same time, we need places for those who may work for our city, who are on the lower end of a relatively wealthy community like Newton. We want to encourage them to live here. So that's critically important. Finally, is to Emily's point about smaller units of housing in terms of size, there's a lot of merit to that. Two caveats. One, you can have a smaller unit by size, but if a developer puts in a lot of amenities,
right.
If you put in granite countertops and a Wolf kitchen, you're going to have
a Wolf kitchen?
Wolf is a a high-end brand of stove.
Okay.
And
Obviously, I'm really on top of this stuff.
Sorry.
Yeah, I got that. I got the Fox dining room, the Bear living room, and the Wolf. I got all that. Got the whole farm.
It's a brand, but regardless,
Welcome to Newton.
if you put in high-end appliances, you put in high-end countertops, you put in
Like our particle
expensive
board,
windows,
like
your cost goes up, and therefore your rents are going to go up. So it's not a one-to-one ratio. If it's smaller, it's necessarily going to be cheaper. So we struggle with that. Short answers, we don't have enough affordable housing in the city.
Okay, and we have a plan to deal with that, or no? Let me go around the table.
Go ahead.
That'll be my next question to the panel. Martina.
Well, the truth is that I guess it's what you call affordable. And, Emily and I live in a neighborhood where there are Newtonville, that have multifamily housing. Somerville has, just as you know, passed an ordinance to help preserve their triple deckers. That's not happening where we are. Those larger houses are being torn down. There's nothing affordable going on in its place. And what about workforce housing? I mean, that's what I hear a lot. Things that can teachers who teach in Newton afford to live there, firefighters, police. This is a real issue about what is affordable. And to Mark's point, what's being built isn't. Land is expensive, production is expensive, labor is expensive, so developers are not building what I think most of us would think of as affordable or workforce housing.
Thank you.
I think we ought to remind people that there's two kinds of affordable. There's the sort of the capital A, officially affordable, subsidized housing inventory type affordable, where it's not anyone can just go and get a unit. You have to enter a lottery and win a lottery, and then you get to be
Stand on your
in
head
it.
for 6 hours.
And then
something like
there's
that, no?
what we kind of call small A affordable, which is what people might define as something my kid can afford to buy or rent. And
Or someone with a certain income could.
right, and that's and the only
So how are we doing in each of those? Now that you've defined it, two different
well
categories.
because
We've hit 10% in one category. How are we doing in the other category?
well, the capital A affordable, we've got our inclusionary zoning ordinance, which is getting us generally 15% or an extra 2.5% of what I think that it would be the workforce
Yeah.
housing category. But again, income qualified and allocated by lottery in the very largest projects. And in 7-unit and above projects, it's 15%. So, but we're getting a lot of.
So right now, how
Yeah.
are we doing in terms of Newton having enough small A affordable units?
I would say we're losing ground, because what's happening is that what would be the relatively affordable, your small capes, bungalows, ranch houses, and especially if they happen to be in a single family house in a two-family zone, or if like in your neighborhood or anything that's not protected by like a local historic district, in a two-family house could get torn down, and you get typically now like 5 units or whatever they can fit in, 4, 5, 6 units.
And none of that's under the threshold.
And because
for
they're under the
inclusionary zoning.
threshold, none of them have to be affordable. So
That's right.
in that respect, we're losing ground.
So I want to pick up on the small A category, because I think that is a critical point. We can say we're at 10%. We're at 10% of this official mathematically calculated category, but it's not what's truly affordable to somebody's kid or to a person on a limited income. And one thing that I've noticed anecdotally, and I think there's been some studies of, which is new construction is much more expensive than old houses.
That's right.
And so, I mean, I could say anecdotally, across the street from me, there was a house that sold for $800,000 a few years ago, and it was replaced with 2 houses on the same lot, each of which, or it's a two-family, they're kind of a connected snout house thing, with a lot of, big parking area in front, tiny little bit of grass, and each one sold for $1.7 million. Now, my contention is that anyone who can afford a $1.7 million house is not at risk of becoming homeless. And there is this trickle-down theory of housing that's been mentioned. Well, maybe if someone moves into that $1.7 million house, they're moving out of something that's a little less expensive, and you can keep trickling down to create affordability. I'm skeptical of this, but I guess to my question to the panel is there any value in protecting older housing stock, which is more naturally affordable, and discouraging teardowns? I've heard, I think Pam Wright talk about trying to do the zoning in a way that would discourage teardowns. Is that being done at all?
I think, Ken, you got to be very careful about this. It's a laudable goal, but if those of us
Is
that
it? I mean, is it useful?
in
to-
many ways, I think it's a laudable goal, but if many of us of a certain age, and I put myself now in that category, look back to how we lived when we were growing up in terms of the size of our houses, the number of bathrooms we expect, whether kids are going to share rooms or not, I would say the expectation in this country has changed significantly. We build homes in this country now that generally are much larger than we might have seen 50 or 75 years ago. We expect more amenities. We see lots and lots and lots of families in this city add on to their houses. The houses that get built, the new houses, tend to be big. And even when people downsize, You
Well, I'm
often
not
see
even- I'm not
people
even talking
downsizing to
about-
fairly large
I'm not even talking about the
apartments.
size. I'm saying, obviously, a larger unit tends to be more expensive. Just the newer ones tend to be much more expensive, is the impression. And I don't know, Mark, by the way, if there is a way of addressing that. I know some people have talked about discouraging tear downs. I don't know if there's a good solution
Well,
to that.
I live in a historic district, so there's no tear downs, right? We're both in a
Right,
historic
we're
district, no
the-
tear downs.
Right, nothing gets, right.
So, but it's complicated because,
You weren't originally a supporter of that historic district, as I recall. or were you?
no, and I'm not saying that plus or minus. What I'm saying is that
That's how we
so
met,
that-
I think, when you were.
probably the house behind me is not in the historic district, so it was a small house. I think it sold for like 800,000. They tore it down. They put up 2 bigger units. It may be that the owner of that original house made more money from selling to a developer who didn't care about the inspection or anything, and they put up these 2, and I think they're god awful ugly, but that's on them. So we would be taking money out of the hands of people that this might be their retirement. And so that is something that I don't know that if we were to propose something like no tear downs or whatever, and this actually, you know, we did try to do a moratorium on tear downs, and people came out of the woodwork to oppose it, and this was part of the reason. People wanted to be able to
Cash in on their.
yeah, and who are we to? So I'm not saying that we shouldn't do more. I did actually reach out to our state representative years ago about the idea of a tear down fee. One could imagine, at least then, if you still went ahead with it, we could generate more money to go to the city for affordable housing. Another thing we haven't talked about is a transfer fee on the sale of homes. That's something that we've talked about. Maybe if it was only on the sale of $2 million homes, that would generate more money for affordable housing. But to limit, you know, to come in, and I hate the tear downs too. I love our beautiful old architecture, but what it would take to stop that is pretty extreme. I'm in a historic district. I can tell you it's extreme. I actually do like living in it now because there's no tear downs, but that limits, if I wanted to sell my house to a developer, I can't. I mean, I could, but they can't tear it down. So that'll limit how much I
So-
could make. So anyway, it's a complicated thing.
I want to get to our third topic. It sounds like we've got fundamentally some common
Can I just
ground.
comment on that, though? Because
Sure.
when it comes to tear downs, and this is basically why I ran for city council in the first place initially and lost twice before I won.
It's why you lost?
Nobody, nobody was doing anything about tear downs. And you know, I tried to help Amy Sangiolo when she was trying to establish a moratorium on tear downs, and they said, "Don't need it. We're going to work on zoning." And you know, what is it? 8 years later, still nothing on residential zoning. But there are measures beyond less extreme than a historic district. We could apply, not give tear down properties the old lot setbacks. We could impose stricter setbacks for new construction. We could. I had another thought and I just lost it.
there-
But anything
basically-
like that would limit the value
Yes,
of your
but
resale. That's all I'm saying.
I think Newton Real Estate appreciates enough that people are going to make a profit. Long-term owners are going to make
You could require
big
more
money
open
anyway.
space or something.
I don't
Okay.
think we owe people extraordinary profits. They're going to get regular profits. I don't think we owe people
Okay.
extraordinary
All right. Well, it
profits.
sounds like maybe we don't have total common ground on whether some limitations on some incentives for not tearing down would make sense under the zoning code. But I also think that would make a great topic for a future show. So anyway, we can have some. And here's another one that I'm going to throw. I'm going to put my 2 cents in on this. I agree with the panel. We're not there yet on affordable housing. I think, frankly, in recent years, we've taken a lot of steps in the wrong direction because what we've been doing is we've been encouraging these mega developments. And I know there's a market demand for them, as Mark points out. People want bigger houses, but they really aren't affordable. And in many cases, they're being put where there were more affordable houses before.
Exactly.
And so what I think some folks call naturally affordable housing is diminishing in the city. I think one thing we can do to mitigate that is restore the provision that used to be in our inclusionary zoning ordinance, that anything you built above what was by right counted towards the inclusionary zoning calculation. What it was 1/4 of whatever you were building rounded up. 1/4 of what you, so you could do 2 by right, you wanted to build 6, that's 4 additional units, you needed 1 affordable. Now if you want to build 6, you don't need any affordable because we have this minimum of 7. And I understand There's a proposal currently on the city council to lower that number back down maybe to 3. I think that would be a good topic for future conversation, and it sounds to me like it would be a good idea. Let's go to our final topic real quick. Marc, we can invite you back to weigh in on that one at that time. I know you've got a lot to say about it. The final topic is, this is the time of year when cities and towns across the nation are offering their State of the City addresses. The mayors and city council presidents, in some cases, are weighing in on the State of the City. I know that Boston had theirs yesterday, and I believe Newton traditionally has its in February, or at least it was February of last year. So I just want to ask the panelists on this first show of the new year, how are we doing in Newton? What is the State of the City? And maybe throw out there one thing that we need to work on in this new year that's good, bad, or it's good, but I'm going to leave it open like that. Julia, you want to go first? Yeah, you go first.
Okay. I think it depends on what your concerns are. I mean, for parents, I think the lack of a teacher contract is a big issue. For a lot of people that I hear from, it's kind of quality of life issues. A big thing is speeding and feeling safe on as a pedestrian on streets or as a driver on streets. And I think traffic calming, there's a sort of unmet demand for traffic calming measures. Another thing is quality of life thing is code enforcement issues, whether it's the overnight
So how are we
parking
doing? Are we good?
not good enough.
What's one thing you'd like to improve this year? I don't want to go. I know you probably got a lot. We'll save some of them for the next show. But if we could improve one thing in the city this year, Julia?
One thing. I'm not sure what my top priority would be there. I maybe doing a little better on the tree ordinance, but
Okay.
I've got a docket item regarding the short-term rental. That's the Airbnb enforcement, because from West Newton, Nonantum, there's a lot.
I think that's worth
there
a
seems to
topic
be-
on a future show.
I think
It sounds
it'll
very
definitely, and hopefully after we've talked about it, we'll know more about
Okay.
the extent of the
So
problem.
you mentioned a bunch of things: traffic,
but-
congestion, calming. Okay. Let's Emily.
I think we're very blessed to be in Newton. I mean, overall, the city is in great shape. It's very desirable to be here. Look around what's happening in the rest of the world. We're very, very lucky to live here, any of us who live here. So that's kudos to the mayor, the city council, our residents who are very engaged. In terms of one thing, it would be very, very hard. I might have to repeat what I said last time. So I'm going to sneak in two. One is flooding. We have to be doing more. We could have a whole show on that, and I hope we do.
Yeah.
But the other, and Julia.
Anytime you want, Emily.
Yeah, I might even come back next month, even if you don't invite me.
You're invited.
Yeah.
Let's talk flooding next month.
Let's do it.
What could be hotter than flooding?
Exactly. Well, I mean, we're
or
seeing
wetter.
a lot. We're seeing
We'll
a lot.
know more
I've
this
gotten a lot of
weekend.
calls on flooding too.
Right.
That's something that's not
Yeah.
going away. But relevant to one of the points that Julia raised, the speeding. I think that if we were to have more speed bumps, speed humps, speed tables around the city, as many other cities do, I think it would be transformative in terms of how safe people feel, not just driving, but walking and biking. People do not do these things because of how unsafe they feel, because of people, and I'm sure it's not people from Newton. I'm sure it's people from outside Newton crossing
I'm
through
sure
Newton
no Newton
who
residents
drive
are
like maniacs, and we don't have the enforcement. We don't have the staff on our police to.
You don't want to look
enforce it
real
every-
carefully at who's in that SUV, because it might be your next door neighbor. Anyway, Marc.
So I'm going to echo what Emily said. We are very fortunate to live in this city. We have a very capable city government. We have very capable city employees. We're blessed to have intelligent, thoughtful, passionate, caring residents. We have an excellent school system. This is a highly desirable place to be, and one where democracy thrives. Look around the rest of the world. Democracy thrives. We go to the voting booth, we vote peacefully, we make
We
changes.
do recounts peacefully.
We do recounts peacefully. We have an orderly process. I don't think we should, given what's going on in the world, I really don't think we should ever take that for granted. I mean that very sincerely. Do we have issues and problems? Sure.
What's one thing you'd like to fix?
So I'm going to tell you what is in my power to do as city council president. I am determined to make the city council do a better job this term. And by that I mean I want us to have better debate. That doesn't mean that we agree, but I want us to think long and hard about how we grapple with issues, so we try to bring people together. We're not divided. I want us to be very transparent about our work so everybody can see it, every councilor's involved. I want city councilors to show up at events throughout the city, because I think showing up matters. And I really want the residents of this city to feel at the end of the day that whether they agree or disagree with the decision we made, that we've done it thoughtfully, carefully, honestly, and fairly. And that is important. And that's the hallmark of a well-run city.
And how will we know at the end of the year whether you've achieved that mark?
I'm not sure exactly. I know how.
You'll come back and tell us. That's
I'll
the
come
answer.
back and tell us. But you know what? I think our residents are going to tell us. And they're going to tell us in the best place they can, which is a voting booth.
No, but in all seriousness, Mark, it would be good if you could come back and
Be happy to.
talk about where you think the successes were, where things were, some more work might be needed.
There's always going to be places for improvement, but I think we can do a better job, and we're going to do a better job.
Martina, how we doing, and what can we improve?
So I do think
In 30 seconds, right? No, just kidding.
Newton is obviously a place highly desirable. What I do think was interesting was the past election, and there was an emphasis, I think, on dialogue and listening to other opinions, and I think achieve that and you will have really accomplished something, Mark, because it is important that people feel themselves heard and not dismissed. The one other thing that I think is to make what happens in the city on the city website more accessible. I think that I've heard this as a goal many times, but I think people feel frustrated that they can't always get the information they're looking for. But I have great hopes and great optimism about the city council.
Okay, well, I'm going to say, well, I think we've, oh, sorry, Julie, you started this off, yeah, so I'm going to put my 2 cents in on this. Yeah, I moved to Newton involuntarily as a 7-year-old, but now that I'm a homeowner and, have lived in Newton now for 48 years, something like that, 46 years, I get to ask myself every year whether Newton's if I could move anywhere in the world, because pretty much I could, right? Whether I would pick Newton, and every year Newton remains my #1 choice. And honestly, it's not for the proximity to Boston. There are other places equally close. That's a great thing. It's not for the parks. I love the parks. It's not even for the schools. We have 2 kids in the schools. The schools are great. There are other communities with great schools. The thing to me about Newton that makes it most appealing is the people who live here. And I think that is well evidenced. I was joking about this a minute ago in response to Mark by the recount. We had a hotly contested Ward 6 councilor race, very close, a recount, and you could, being there and being part of that, talking with people, we can have people from different political persuasions and who are just absolutely lovely to sit there and talk with, and it's just a great feeling being in Newton. And I think, by the way, a lot of the reason why Newton attracts the people it does are those other things, like the great schools and the proximity to Boston. But for whatever reason, we have fabulous human beings in the city, and I hope we can keep it that way in years to come. If we can improve one thing, one really minor, I think, easy to do thing, low-hanging fruit, the street maintenance. It does sometimes feel like a third world country driving around the city, and you can even notice it when you're at the city line crossing over. The preventive maintenance, not just of our streets, but of our buildings and of our parks. We could do a lot more there. No budgets are tight, but I would like to see us take pride in our infrastructure. And I think it's ultimately good for the quality of life and the environment and for the people we attract to our community. So thanks everyone for being on the panel. Thanks, Julia. Thanks,
Pleasure.
Martina. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Emily. I hope you'll all come back real soon. And I hope, thanks to our fabulous crew, to Will for directing, to Oksana, and to everyone at home for watching. And please, please, join us next time when we try to find just an eensy-weensy bit more common ground.